Little girl begged for milk on the street with baby in her arms, and rich CEO couldn't walk by. One morning, a CEO was on his way to the office. His steps were steady, his thoughts occupied with the business day ahead. But just ahead on the footpath, he noticed a small figure sitting on the ground. A little girl clutched a baby tightly in her arms. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, her voice almost breaking. "Please, some money for milk. My brother is hungry." The baby whimpered weakly, his head resting against her shoulder. The girl's face was pale, her body swaying as if she might collapse any moment. The CEO stopped. He could have walked past, just like everyone else, but his eyes locked on hers. Something about the desperation in that small voice pulled at him in a way he couldn't explain. He stepped closer. "What's your name?" The girl looked up, surprised that someone had spoken. "Sophie," she said softly. "And this is my brother Noah." The CEO's chest tightened. Sophie looked far too young to carry such a burden, yet her arms held on to Noah with unshakable strength. For a moment, he was silent, then he nodded slowly. "All right, Sophie, let's get him some milk." Her eyes widened in disbelief. She rose to her feet, still holding Noah close. Her legs shook, but she followed him across the street into a small cafe. Without hesitation, the CEO ordered warm milk and some food. Soon, a cup of milk and a plate of eggs arrived. Sophie held the cup to Noah's lips. The baby began to drink, weakly at first, then eagerly. Relief softened Sophie's face. Tears spilling again, but this time they carried gratitude. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." The CEO leaned closer. "Where are your parents?" Sophie lowered her eyes. Her voice was small. "They're gone." The words struck him deeply. He looked at her and Noah. Two children alone in the world, surviving on nothing but hope. And in that moment, he knew. This was not just a chance meeting. It was the start of something that would change his life forever. The cafe had grown quiet. Conversations that once filled the air now seemed to fade into the background. All the CEO could hear was Sophie's soft breathing, Noah's tiny gulps as he drank from the cup, and the echo of her words, "They're gone." He sat back in his chair, his polished suit and expensive watch suddenly feeling out of place in front of these two fragile lives. For years, his decisions revolved around profit margins, mergers, and strategies that shaped industries. But now, sitting across from a girl who had nothing but her brother, those achievements felt hollow. Sophie gently stroked Noah's head as he finished the milk. She shifted him in her arms, careful and protective, as though afraid the world might try to take him away. Her eyes stayed down, shy, almost ashamed of needing help. The CEO cleared his throat. "Sophie, where do you live?" She hesitated. We don't have a place. Just wherever we can." Her voice trembled. The words hit him like a sharp wind. A little girl no older than 10. And a baby living with no roof, no safety. He glanced at her thin frame, the way her knees showed through the holes in her dress. The way Noah's small hands clung to her clothes. "You've been sleeping outside?" he asked quietly. Sophie nodded. "Sometimes a shelter lets us stay. But they're always full. Most nights it's just the street." The CEO felt his throat tighten. His mind flashed to his penthouse. Walls of glass, fine leather couches, a bed so large it could fit 4 people. The contrast made him shift uncomfortably. He had always believed success meant working harder, pushing further. Yet here was a child who had no chance to even begin, already forced into battles far bigger than her small shoulders could carry. "Where's your family?" "No relatives, no one to help." Sophie's lips pressed together. "No one. Just me and Noah." The CEO leaned back, exhaling slowly. He could walk away after this meal. That was the easy choice. He could tell himself he had done enough. Bought milk, given food, shown kindness. He could leave them to the streets, and no one would question him. But deep inside, something told him this was no accident. Life had thrown Sophie and Noah into his path for a reason. Noah let out a small sigh, full from the warm milk. His tiny fingers reached toward the CEO's sleeve, brushing the fabric like it was the safest thing he could hold. The gesture struck him in a place he didn't know still existed. Sophie's eyes flicked up. "Are you going now, sir?" Her voice was timid, almost bracing for the moment he would disappear like everyone else. The CEO looked at her, then at Noah, then back at her. He should have been in his office already, preparing for a board meeting. Investors were waiting. His assistant was probably calling nonstop. But none of that felt heavier than the thought of leaving Sophie and Noah behind. He leaned forward. "No, Sophie. I'm not going anywhere just yet." Her lips parted, confusion mixing with relief. "Listen," he said carefully, "you don't belong on the streets. You and Noah, you need more than just food for today. You need safety." Sophie clutched Noah tighter, almost protectively. People say that, sir. They give a little, then they leave. Everyone leaves." Her words cut through him like a knife. The CEO swallowed, realizing how deeply this child had been let down. He softened his tone. "I'm not everyone, Sophie. I don't walk away when something matters. And right now, you and your brother matter." For a moment, she just stared at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. She had learned not to trust easily, yet something about his voice carried weight. "Where will we go?" she asked softly. The CEO paused, he hadn't thought that far ahead. Taking them home, to his penthouse. The thought seemed absurd, yet leaving them outside was unthinkable. He rubbed his temples. "There are options," he said. "Shelters. Yes. But also maybe something better." His phone buzzed in his pocket. For the first time, he didn't reach for it. He didn't want the world of business intruding on this moment. Sophie lowered her gaze again, whispering, "We'll be okay. You don't have to do more. You've already helped us." Her words were humble, but her voice carried exhaustion. It was the voice of a child who had learned to stop expecting miracles. The CEO leaned closer. "Sophie, look at me." Slowly she raised her eyes. "I don't do halfway. If I start something, I finish it. And I've started helping you. That means I'm not leaving until you and Noah are safe." Her lips trembled. She wanted to believe him. For the first time in a long time, hope flickered in her tired eyes. Noah stirred, shifting against her chest. The CEO watched the way Sophie rocked him gently, whispering words of comfort too soft for him to hear. That protective love, fierce and pure, reminded him of something money could never buy. He stood up suddenly. "Come with me." Sophie's eyes widened. "Where?" "To my car. It's warm. You can rest for a while. We'll figure things out from there." She hesitated, hugging Noah tighter. Trusting a stranger was dangerous, even if he wore a suit and spoke kindly. But something about his presence made her believe, if only for this moment, that he meant what he said. "Okay," she whispered. The CEO extended his hand. Slowly, cautiously, Sophie reached out and placed her small hand in his. As they stepped out of the cafe, people turned to watch, murmurs rippling through the crowd. A powerful businessman walking hand in hand with a frail little girl and her baby brother. It was a picture that didn't fit the world's usual script. But to the CEO, it felt exactly right. Outside, his sleek black car waited by the curb. The driver, startled by the sight of the children, quickly opened the door. The CEO helped Sophie inside, making sure Noah was secure in her arms. As the car pulled away, he leaned back in his seat, his thoughts churning. He didn't know where this path would lead. He only knew one thing with absolute certainty: he had seen Sophie and Noah. And now, he could never unsee them. This was no longer just about kindness. It was about responsibility. And for the first time in years, the CEO felt that his day had truly begun. The hum of the car filled the silence. Sophie sat pressed against the leather seat, her arms wrapped tightly around Noah. The baby had dozed off after the milk, his small head resting against her shoulder. She stroked his hair absent-mindedly, her eyes darting nervously between the window and the CEO sitting beside her. For her, this was a world she had never entered: polished interiors, tinted glass, the faint smell of expensive cologne lingering in the air. It was too clean, too perfect, almost unreal. She shifted uncomfortably, afraid that even breathing too loudly might disturb something. The CEO glanced at her. He noticed the way she clutched her brother like a lifeline, her knuckles white, her body rigid with uncertainty. He could sense her fear, her mistrust. The weight of years far too heavy for someone her age. "Are you comfortable?" he asked gently. She nodded quickly, though her wide eyes said otherwise. He softened his tone. "You don't need to be scared. You're safe here." The words hung in the air. Safe. It was a promise Sophie hadn't heard in years. She wanted to believe it, But safety had always slipped from her grasp, no matter how hard she tried to hold on. The driver's eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror. Curiosity clear in his expression. He had driven his boss for years, through countless meetings and business trips. But he had never seen him with children, especially not children like these. Still, he kept quiet, sensing this wasn't his place. The CEO turned slightly towards Sophie. You must be tired. How long have you been out there on the streets? She hesitated. Her eyes fixed on Noah as though answering might make her reality too heavy to carry. A while, she whispered. Since my parents were gone, he asked carefully. She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. They got sick. Both of them. And then, it was just me and Noah. The CEO felt a heaviness settle in his chest. He had lost people in his life too, but never in a way that left him utterly alone. He couldn't imagine being Sophie's age and forced into the role of both protector and parent overnight. He studied her small frame. Her hair was tangled. Her clothes worn thin, but beneath the layers of hardship was resilience. She had kept Noah alive. She had begged when she needed to, fought against shame, endured cold nights, because giving up was never an option. You've been strong for him. The CEO said quietly. Stronger than most adults I know. Sophie glanced at him, surprised. Compliments were not something she was used to. She looked away quickly, whispering. I had to. He's all I have. The CEO nodded, his jaw tightening. That kind of loyalty, that kind of love, it stirred something deep in him. He thought about his own life. He had money, influence, a team that followed his orders. But what did he have that was truly his? What did he hold with that kind of devotion? As the car moved through the streets, the world outside shifted from crowded sidewalks to wide avenues lined with tall buildings. Sophie's eyes widened at the sight of glass towers that reached into the clouds. She had seen them from a distance before, but never this close. Do you live there? She asked softly, pointing toward one of the tallest skyscrapers. The CEO followed her gaze. Yes. The top floors. Her mouth parted slightly. She tried to imagine what it was like to live up there, where the world looked small and far away. Where hunger and cold nights didn't exist. She looked down at Noah and sighed quietly, as if wishing she could lift him into such a place and keep him there forever. The CEO noticed the look in her eyes. Would you like to see it? He asked. Her head snapped toward him, disbelief flashing across her face. Your home. He nodded. Sophie's first instinct was to shake her head. Strangers were dangerous. She had learned that lesson too many times. But something about him, his calmness, his steady eyes, the way he hadn't once looked at her with pity, made her pause. Just for now. She whispered cautiously. The CEO gave a small smile. Just for now. The car pulled up in front of a towering building of glass and steel. The doorman's eyes widened slightly as he saw his employer step out with a ragged little girl and a baby in his arms. Whispers followed them, but no one dared question the man they served. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Sophie clutched Noah tighter, her eyes darting from one shining surface to the next. It was too much, too bright, too big. She had spent nights curled up under cardboard. Now she stood under chandeliers that sparkled like stars. Come, the CEO said gently, guiding her toward the private elevator. The ride up was silent except for the soft hum of the machine. Sophie's reflection stared back at her in the mirrored walls. Thin, tired. Holding Noah like he was her entire world. She barely recognized herself standing in such a place. When the doors opened, the sight took her breath away. The penthouse spread out before her like another universe. Wide windows stretched from floor to ceiling, giving a view of the city that looked almost magical. Plush furniture, polished floors, paintings on the walls. Everything looked unreal. This is your house. She whispered, almost afraid her voice would break it. Yes. The CEO replied simply. This is home. Sophie stepped inside cautiously, her bare feet almost too shy to touch the polished wood. She held Noah close as if the beauty around them might swallow him whole. The CEO watched her carefully. He saw awe in her eyes, but also fear. Fear of not belonging. Of being in a place so far removed from her world. You don't have to be afraid, he said softly. This place is safe. You and Noah can rest here tonight. Her head whipped toward him. Tonight, we can stay, Yes, he said firmly. Both of you. Her lips trembled. Her eyes filling with tears, she tried to blink away. She had grown used to rejection, to doors closing before she could even knock. Now, for the first time in a long time, a door had opened. She lowered Noah gently onto the couch, stroking his hair as he stirred in his sleep. Then she turned back to the CEO, her voice breaking. Why are you doing this? Why us? The CEO paused. He could have said it was pity. He could have said it was charity. But the truth was deeper. Because, he said slowly, I couldn't walk by. And maybe, I wasn't supposed to. Sophie stared at him, her tears slipping free. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. And for the CEO, standing in his glittering penthouse, for the first time in years, he didn't feel empty. The penthouse was quiet, the kind of quiet that carried weight. Sophie stood frozen near the doorway, her thin hands twisting together, unsure if she should step further inside. She felt like an intruder. A shadow that didn't belong in a place where everything sparkled. The CEO noticed her hesitation. He walked toward the couch, gently adjusting the blanket around Noah's tiny body. The baby had drifted back into sleep, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. For the first time that day, his face looked peaceful. Calm, the CEO said softly, motioning for Sophie to sit. She shook her head quickly. I'll stand. It's too clean here. I might ruin something. His chest tightened at her words. The thought that a child could see herself as something capable only of ruining instead of belonging. It struck him deeply. You can't ruin anything here. Sophie, he said firmly. This is just a house. It's walls and furniture. What matters is who's inside. Her eyes flicked to him, uncertain. But the steadiness in his tone gave her courage. Slowly, carefully, she stepped onto the polished floor, and lowered herself onto the couch beside Noah. The CEO sat across from them, his elbows resting on his knees. For years this space had been filled with silence. No laughter, no warmth. Just the hum of machines and the rustle of paperwork. Tonight, for the first time, it felt alive. Sophie's gaze wandered around the room. She noticed the towering shelves filled with books, the paintings on the walls, the glowing city outside the window. It was a different world than the one she knew. A world where hunger didn't exist, where nights weren't spent shivering on the ground. Her eyes returned to the CEO. What's your name? She asked quietly. He blinked, realizing he hadn't introduced himself. People usually knew him before he ever spoke. But Sophie didn't care about his company, his reputation, or the fortune tied to his name. Daniel, he said finally. My name is Daniel. Sophie repeated it softly, almost testing it on her tongue. Daniel. Then she lowered her eyes. Thank you, Daniel. For helping us. He nodded slowly. You don't need to thank me. You needed help, and I was there. That's all. But Sophie shook her head. No one ever stops. People see us, but they never stop. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she quickly bit her lip to hold back tears. Daniel leaned back, his jaw tightening. He wasn't used to being confronted with truths this raw. His world was built on control, on shaping outcomes with precision. Yet here, he couldn't control the fact that society had failed a child. He drew a slow breath. Well, I stopped. And I'm not leaving you now. Sophie blinked at him, unsure if she should believe those words. Hope had a way of hurting more than hunger when it broke. The hours passed slowly. Daniel ordered food, though Sophie barely touched her plate. She kept her focus on Noah, tucking the blanket around him, checking his breathing as if afraid he might slip away in his sleep. When the clock struck 10, Daniel rose. You both need rest. There's a guest room down the hall. It's yours tonight. Sophie hesitated, looking toward Noah. Can I carry him there? Daniel gave a small nod. Of course. She lifted Noah gently, her small arms cradling him with practiced care. Daniel led her down the hallway, opening the door to a spacious room with a soft bed, warm lighting, and curtains drawn against the city night. Sophie froze at the threshold. The bed looked too big, too soft, almost like something out of a dream. You can sleep here, Daniel said. Both of you. It's safe. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know if I can. It feels wrong. Daniel tilted his head. Wrong. Sophie hugged Noah closer. I'm used to cold ground, to hard floors. I'm scared I'll wake up, and it'll all be gone. Just another dream. Her words pierced him. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. This isn't a dream, Sophie. It's real. You're safe here. Tonight, you can sleep without fear. Slowly. She walked inside and lowered Noah onto the bed. The baby stirred, then settled into the softness. Sophie climbed in beside him, curling protectively around his tiny frame. Daniel stood at the doorway watching. For years, he had measured success in numbers and contracts. But tonight, watching a child finally lay her head on a safe pillow, he realized success could look like this too. Good night, Sophie, he said quietly. Her eyes fluttered shut. Good night, Daniel. He closed the door gently, leaving her in peace. Back in the living room, Daniel poured himself a glass of water and sat in silence. His phone buzzed with missed calls, emails piling up, but he ignored them all. His thoughts lingered on Sophie's words. Everyone leaves. He wondered what tomorrow would bring. What did it mean to take responsibility for two children he had just met? Was he ready for that weight? Could he balance his empire and their lives at the same time? For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. He walked to the window, looking out at the glittering city. He had conquered this world. But what good was it if children like Sophie and Noah still had to beg on its streets? He turned away from the glass and looked down the hall where the guest room was. Somewhere in that room, Sophie and Noah slept. Somewhere in his chest, a new resolve was forming, a feeling he hadn't known he needed. This wasn't coincidence. This was a turning point. The night passed quietly. When morning came, Daniel rose early. The penthouse was filled with a soft light, the city waking below. He walked to the guest room and opened the door gently. Sophie was still asleep, her arm curled protectively around Noah. For the first time, her face looked peaceful, free from fear and exhaustion. Daniel stood there, watching in silence. Something about the sight stirred him deeply. He realized this wasn't just about helping them through one night. This was bigger. He closed the door softly and whispered to himself. This is just the beginning. Then, the smell of breakfast drifted through the penthouse, warm and inviting. Daniel hadn't cooked in years, but today, something in him wanted to. He stood by the stove, stirring scrambled eggs, flipping toast, and glancing occasionally toward the hallway where Sophie and Noah still slept. The clatter of a plate startled Sophie awake. She blinked, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was. Her hand flew instinctively to Noah's chest, relief flooding her when she felt his steady breathing. Noah stirred, rubbing his tiny fists against his eyes. Sophie whispered, "It's okay, we're safe." For the first time in months, she believed her own words. She carried Noah into the kitchen, her bare feet padding softly on the polished floor. Daniel looked up and smiled faintly. "Good morning." Sophie hesitated, her gaze darting to the table set with food. Plates, glasses, fresh fruit, so much more than she'd seen in one place. She shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Sit," Daniel said gently. "Both of you." She lowered Noah into a chair, his little legs dangling. Then she perched carefully on the edge of her seat, as if afraid she might break something. Daniel placed eggs and toast on their plates. Sophie stared at hers for a long moment before whispering, "Are you sure? This is for us." "Yes," Daniel replied. "It's for you." Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the fork. The first bite sent warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten fullness. Noah giggled as he smeared eggs across his face, and Sophie couldn't stop the small laugh that escaped her. Daniel noticed it. The sound was soft, unguarded, and it lit up the room more than the morning sun. When breakfast was done, Sophie leaned back in her chair, her eyes drifting toward the city view. "Daniel, what happens now?" The question hung heavy in the air. Daniel set his coffee cup down, thinking carefully. He wasn't used to not knowing the answer. In boardrooms, his voice was the final word. Here, with Sophie, he felt the weight of every syllable. "You don't have to worry about the streets anymore," he said finally. "You're safe here." Sophie's brow furrowed. "But for how long? People always say things then they change their minds. They get tired of us." Her honesty stung. Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. "I won't get tired of you. I don't walk away from responsibility." Sophie looked at him closely, as if testing whether his words carried truth. After a long pause, she nodded slightly, though doubt still lingered in her eyes. Too later that morning, Daniel made a call. He spoke briefly to his assistant, instructing her to cancel all his meetings for the day. He had an empire waiting, but today it could wait longer. He turned to Sophie. I need to know your story. How did you end up on that street? Her fingers twisted together, the old nervous habit returning. It's not a nice story. Tell me anyway. Daniel said softly. She drew a deep breath, her voice trembling. My parents, they're gone. My dad died when Noah was just a baby. My mom tried, she really did. But the sickness came and there was no money for doctors. I watched her fade away. After that, it was just me and Noah. Daniel's chest tightened. He could picture it. The little girl fighting against a world that never gave her a chance. I tried to find work. Sophie continued. Washing dishes, sweeping floors. But they said I was too small. So I begged. I begged because I had no choice. I couldn't let Noah starve. Her voice cracked. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the tears. Daniel reached across the table, not touching her. Just placing his hand near hers. You did what you had to do. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger than anyone I've met. She looked at him through blurred eyes. Stronger. I feel broken. He shook his head. No. You're not broken. You've carried more weight than most adults ever will. And you're still standing. Sophie's lips trembled. But for the first time, she let his words sink in. The rest of the day passed quietly. Daniel showed Sophie and Noah the penthouse, the books, the balcony, even the piano in the corner. Sophie touched the keys hesitantly, pressing one note at a time, the sound echoing softly through the room. You can learn if you want, Daniel said. Her eyes widened. Learn? Yes. Daniel replied simply. Why not you? The question startled her. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, as if possibility belonged to her too. By evening, Noah had fallen asleep again, his little body heavy with exhaustion. Sophie tucked him into bed, humming softly to him. Daniel stood in the doorway, listening. The gentle melody carried something raw, something unpolished but pure. When she noticed him, she stopped, embarrassed. Sorry, I don't sing well. Daniel shook his head. It was beautiful. Her cheeks flushed. She turned back to Noah, smoothing his hair. Too later that night, Sophie sat on the balcony, knees pulled up to her chest, staring at the city lights. Daniel joined her, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. He handed one to her. She held it carefully, the steam rising against her face. I used to dream about being up here, she admitted. When I was on the street, I'd look up at buildings like this and wonder who lived inside. I thought maybe they didn't know we even existed. Daniel sipped his drink, the words cutting deeper than she realized. For years, he had lived above it all. Disconnected, he hadn't noticed. Or maybe he had chosen not to. You're right, he said quietly. People like me we don't see enough. Maybe we don't want to. But I see you now, Sophie, and I won't forget. She looked at him, her eyes wide. You promise? Daniel met her gaze steadily. I promise. The city stretched out below them, vast and indifferent. But in that moment, on that balcony, a new kind of world was forming. One built not on wealth or power, but on a fragile, growing trust between a wounded girl and a man learning what it meant to care again. As Sophie leaned back against the chair, clutching her warm cup, she whispered, maybe this isn't a dream after all. Daniel smiled faintly. Though he didn't say it aloud. He felt the same way. And somewhere deep inside, he knew. This was only the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined. The days that followed were unlike anything Sophie had ever known. Warm meals, clean clothes, a bed to sleep in. Noah's cheeks slowly regained their color. And his laughter began to fill the rooms of the penthouse. For the first time, Sophie could breathe without fear. Daniel watched them carefully. At first, he thought of his role as temporary. A guardian until something more, official, could be arranged. But with every sunrise, the thought of letting them go grew heavier. One morning, as the golden light poured through the tall windows, Daniel's phone rang. It was his attorney. Daniel, the man said, his tone clipped, I've reviewed the situation. You can't just keep the children. There are legal steps. Foster care agencies. Daniel's jaw clenched. Agencies. You think I'll hand them over to a system that left them starving on the street? The attorney paused. I understand your concern. But law doesn't bend to sentiment. Daniel ended the call without another word. He turned and found Sophie standing in the doorway. Her small frame framed by the light. She had heard. Her voice shook. Or are they going to take us away? Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to promise her safety. But promises without power were empty. He crouched down so his eyes met hers. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I'll fight. I'll fight harder than I've fought for anything in my life. A tears welled in her eyes. Everyone says that. And then they leave. Not me. He whispered, steady as steel. Not me. That evening, Daniel made a decision. He canceled meetings, ignored shareholders, and walked into the city hand in hand with Sophie and Noah. He wanted them to see the world from a different angle. Not as beggars on the sidewalk, but as part of something bigger. They passed through the park where Sophie once sat shivering in the cold. This time, she held Noah's hand tightly and walked with her head higher. Daniel saw people glance their way, not with pity but with curiosity. Who was this little girl? Walking beside one of the most powerful men in the city. At a bench, Sophie sat down, her eyes following children who played freely on the grass. She hugged Noah closer. I wish, she whispered. What do you wish? Daniel asked. Her voice was barely audible. That Noah could grow up never knowing the things I've seen. Daniel's throat burned. He looked at Noah's innocent face and knew. This wasn't about charity. It was destiny. Back at the penthouse, Sophie drew a picture on a scrap of paper Daniel had given her. Two stick figures holding hands with a smaller one in between. She handed it to him shyly. That's us, she said. Noah and you. The paper trembled in Daniel's hands. A simple drawing. Yet it carried more weight than any contract he had ever signed. He knelt beside her. Do you really want me in that picture? Sophie nodded without hesitation. You're the only one who stayed. For the first time in years, Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. He pulled her gently into his arms. Noah squirming happily between them. It wasn't a family in the traditional sense, but it was a family nonetheless. 2 weeks later, the case went to court. The state questioned Daniel's capacity to raise 2 children alone, pointing to his responsibilities as a CEO. Lawyers debated, papers shuffled, and the system threatened to pull Sophie and Noah into its grasp. Then Sophie stood. Small, fragile, but unshakable. She looked straight at the judge. Please, she said softly, don't send us away. Daniel is the first person who ever made me feel safe. He's the only one who makes Noah smile. We don't need a system. We need him. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge's stern expression softened. Daniel's heart ached as he listened. Realizing this little girl, who had carried burdens far too heavy for her age, was now fighting for him as much as he was fighting for her. When the gavel finally struck, the decision was made. Custody was granted. Sophie and Noah were no longer children of the streets. They were Daniel's responsibility, his family. That night, Daniel stood once more at the balcony, the city glowing below. Sophie joined him, Noah asleep in her arms. You kept your promise, she whispered. Daniel looked at her, his voice thick with emotion. No, Sophie. We kept it, together. For a long moment. They stood in silence, the weight of their journey settling into something unshakable. A bond forged not by blood, but by love, by choice. By the courage to stop and see one another in a world too busy to notice. The man who once walked past millions of faces, without caring, had finally stopped for one little girl. And in doing so, he had found the family he never knew he needed. And Sophie, who once begged for scraps, now carried a future filled with warmth, laughter and hope. Their story wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished. But it was real, and it was theirs. As the night wrapped around them, Sophie looked up at Daniel with a small, tired smile. Thank you, she said simply. Daniel pulled her close. His eyes on the horizon. No, Sophie. Thank you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next story. And if you've ever seen kindness change a life, share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for giving your precious time. Your support keeps these stories alive.